One fog-shrouded evening, a journalist named Sarah arrives at Whispering Cedars, a small village deep in the forests of Oregon. This village was notorious for its strange stories. People used to say that their whispers are heard from the woods, shadows follow, and people mysteriously disappear. Sarah decides to stay in the village's old Whispering Inn. This inn was creepy, the wooden floors creaked, and the streets were eerily silent. The first night, Sarah suddenly woke up to the sound of whispers. It was not the noise of the wind but was like calling someone by name. He looked out the window and saw only deep and scary forests. Suddenly he saw some movement among the trees, a shadow moving rapidly. As the morning dawned, Sarah decided to go into the forest and investigate. There he found an old, dilapidated hut. The door of the hut was open. The atmosphere inside was suffocating, there were strange symbols carved on the walls. Inside the hut, Sarah finds an old diary. A stranger had written about the Watchers in the diary. They were shadow-like creatures who lived among the trees. His whispers would drive people crazy. That night, Sarah tells all this to Mrs. Clark, the elderly owner of the Whispering Inn. Clark, frightened, advises Sarah to leave the village. They don't like outsiders, he said. Sarah ignored Clark's warning and took her camera and went into the woods. The whispers grew louder as the sun set. Suddenly, there was a gust of cold air and she could see them, tall, dark creatures, with eyes empty and fearful. They gathered around Sarah and pointed in one direction. Compelled by some invisible force, Sarah followed them. In an open space, Sarah saw an ancient stone altar, covered with bloodstains. There was a black crystal placed in the center of the altar, which was glowing with red light. As soon as Sarah touched the crystal, horrifying visions started appearing in her mind. She understood the watchmen and their hunger for souls. Trembling with fear, she ran back to the village, but when she reached there she found that the entire village was empty. The inns, houses, and roads were all deserted. Sarah ran towards her car, but the tires of the car had been slashed. The watchmen appeared again, their whispers echoing in the ears. Sarah gathered courage and ran away through the forest. Eventually, in the morning she reached a road, or a truck stopped and helped her. When he told his story, the driver said, "Whispering Cedars? That village was destroyed 50 years ago." Sarah tried to play it safe, but the whispers kept following her. She began hearing the voices of watchmen in the air, in the crowd, and even in her dreams. His last diary entry read, *, "They're coming for me." Maybe they weren't limited to the Whispering Cedars. Maybe they're everywhere. *. Sarah climbed the old and creepy stairs of the Whispering Inn to her room. The room was made of old wooden floors, which creaked with every step. There were dusty pictures hanging on the walls, which had a desolate glimpse of a bygone era. Dense forests were visible outside the window, over which a light mist was hovering. Sarah switched off the light and lay down on the bed. The ticking of the clock was echoing in the room. The winds were blowing lightly outside. Suddenly, around midnight, Sarah heard a faint whisper. "Sarah, Sarah." He opened his eyes and looked around. The room was completely immersed in darkness. The whispers were heard again, this time closer. Sarah quickly switched on the lamp. The room was still empty. But the whispers did not stop. They were becoming clear now. The sounds seemed to be coming from inside the walls. He took out his flashlight from his bag and looked out the window. Nothing was clearly visible outside. The cedar trees were swaying with the light breeze. Then his eyes fell on a movement. Something was moving among the trees. It was not an animal. It looked like a human figure, but very long and thin. Sarah immediately pulled the curtains of the window. His heart was beating fast. She could not understand whether it was her illusion or the truth. The whispers were gradually becoming louder. It seemed as if she was repeating a special message. Sarah tried to concentrate, but the words were not clear. She was oscillating between fear and confusion. He locked the door of the inn and placed his notebook near the bed. "All this has to be written down," he said to himself. As she was trying to lie down again, there was suddenly a scratching sound on the window glass. Sarah gathered all her courage and went to the window. He tried to peek, but the mist had obscured everything. Then he saw a face, big, empty eyes staring into nothingness. The face suddenly disappeared. She was about to scream when the whispers became louder. Now it was not the voice of one person, but many voices, speaking together. "You shouldn't have come here." Sarah closed the door more firmly. His entire body was drenched with sweat. She thought that she would not come out of the inn till morning. Sarah remained sitting on the bed for the rest of the night. He kept awake. The whispers gradually subsided, but their echoes were still in his ears. The first rays of morning came into the room, but Sarah got no relief. He immediately picked up his camera and notebook and thought of talking to the inn owner. As she descended, she realized that the inn's corridors were still strangely empty. She headed straight towards the reception.